Hello, and welcome back to Honors Bio. So, today we're going to kick off talking about evolution, and we're going to get through half of natural selection, and I'll put another video about the rest of natural selection. So, when we talk about evolution, we talk about as just how do species change over time. Really, all evolution is saying is just how do species change over time, and where do we get new species? Where do they come from? Everything like that. In essence, that's what evolution is. Just how do we get new species? So simply, it's just change over time is all it is. And evolution can help us understand the history of life. Typically, right, when we talk about living things, especially in the kingdom Eukarya, right, plants, animals, us, fungi, we talked about, well, what are similarities that we share? Well, we're all eukaryotic cells, so that means that we, do this and we do that, blah, 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 all the things that eukaryotic cells have in common. Even among animals and plants and fungi, we do sexual reproduction. So that adaptation, that change, is something that we all share. So then it just helps us to understand, where did different species come from. And these ideas help us is that then we share a common ancestor. Just like how you and your cousin share, your same grandma. Um, Life shares a common ancestor, right? This kind of eukaryotic cell theory that all kingdom eukarya can be traced back to the first eukaryotic cell. And where did that come from? Plants, we can trace back flowering plants like roses. All flowering plants are related to the first flowering plant. Same thing with fungi and animals, and even amongst different animal species, you can trace that back. That's all we're saying. Um, so our evidence for evolution, what we got for it is there's 5 big ones. Natural selection is typically the mechanism of how evolution happens. There's the fossil record to help us show this lineage that we're talking about. Comparative anatomy, embryonic development, and DNA similarities among species really help kind of solidify this idea. So let's talk about natural selection, and that's really the main focus of this video, and the next video is natural selection. So natural selection is typically what we talk about is the mechanism for how evolution can occur on a grand scale. Now, natural selection is not evolution, okay? Natural selection is really just saying how does a single species, kind of slowly change over time. We're not getting new species from natural selection. Now, granted, I misspoke. We can get new species from natural selection, but we have to kind of stack up differences and accumulate a bunch of different things in order to get to a new species. Natural selection really is just saying, okay, who's going to be best suited for their environment? And that's what natural selection is. Natural selection is just saying, hey, what adaptation best allows you to be able to survive and reproduce in your environment? And in general, there's 5 general steps to natural selection. There's overproduction, so we have to make more plants and animals than that what could possibly survive. There has to be variation, so there has to be enough just natural differences passed on through just simple genetics and mutations to account for these differences to occur. Adaptation, so inheritance of traits have to be passed on that give an advantage in a particular environment. So and then selection, so then these adaptations allow organisms to either survive and reproduce or just reproduce more often than organisms that don't have that adaptation. And speciation. So then eventually we can get new species with enough time and enough kind of accumulated differences, usually because species get isolated in some way, shape, or form. And when we'll talk about speciation and all that stuff later. So let's just go through these steps. So the first step is this overproduction. So we have to be able to make more species, or just more species have to produce more offspring than what can survive. I mean, really, because if there's enough resources to go around, then species would never change, or the environment never changes. There'd be no pressure to change. So each species has to produce more offspring than what can survive. Of that offspring, we're gonna have variation within just even that offspring, right? Because if you have siblings look similar, but they're also different from each other. So there's that variation in there. So, and that's what when talking about adaptations. Adaptations come from these variations. Adaptation there is a trait that increases an organism's chance of survival, right? So these ladybugs here, they're all ladybugs, but they all show variation as far as coloration is concerned. Some are lighter in color, some have many spots, some have little spots. That's all different types of variation that's going to influence that organism's chance of survival. So, and really all adaptations is they're just things that will help an individual organism survive in that particular environment. And they don't have to be like a structural, like camouflage or coloration or height or whatever. It can also be a behavioral kind of adaptation as well. And when we talk about adaptations, there's kind of three big ones that we talk about. There's tons of them, but there's three kind of basic ones I'm just gonna walk you through: mimicry, camouflage, and physiological adaptations. So when we talk about adaptations, here are just some. The thumb gave us an adaptation when it comes to grips. We can really hold on to something, or if we need to work like fine motor skills work, the thumb really comes into play there. Our pupils are a great adaptation for us. So when it's darker out or there's not a lot of light, the pupil expands to let more light in. That's why, like when you first go outside and it's dark out, you really can't see a lot. But if you give it a couple minutes, you can see more. That's because your pupil has expanded to let more light in. And the verse is true. If you're all of a sudden hit with light, like if you ever come out of a movie theater and you walk outside and like you're blinded for a minute, that's because your pupil is still expanded. It hasn't shrunk yet to kind of limit the amount of light. Giraffes with long necks are that same idea there, right? Just the longer neck giraffes can reach more food. It's great. So there's mimicry. And mimicry is what is a structural adaptation that enables one species to resemble another. And there's three basic types, but we're only gonna walk two of them. There's Batesian and aggressive. Batesian mimicry is where a harmless species evolves to look like predators or like a harmful species. And then there's aggressive mimicry, which is where predators change to lure prey in. They have adaptations to lure prey in. So if you look at Batesian, right, these are all things that can sting you. The bumblebees, honeybees, not honeybees, but bumblebees, paper wasps, yellow jackets, all these things that have a very similar coloration pattern, right? They all have this yellow and black coloration pattern. These are all things that can sting you, and they get hurt. If you ever got stung before, I don't recommend it. But these are all things that sting you. Now, animals have learned, especially birds have learned, I don't want to mess with these things, so I'm not gonna eat them. Well, what they learn then, what different things learn, is robber flies and hoverflies learn that, hey, if I have this same coloration, I'm less likely to get eaten. That's basically, these flies have evolved to use an adaptation to resemble things that can hurt predators so they don't get eaten. Right? So there's an example of Batesian mimicry. This is not a snake, it's a caterpillar. This caterpillar, its head resembles the green viper for a reason. This is because this deters predators that may think that, oh, caterpillars are a great snack. But when they see the viper head, they're like, oh, I don't want to tangle with a snake. So they go away. As another example of Batesian mimicry, a harmless species evolves to look like a harmful species. You got the coral snake, right? Coral snake, venomous, super not good if you get bitten by a coral snake. But yet, the scarlet king snake is harmless. It's non-venomous, but it has the same coloration as the coral snake does. And that's for a reason. So predators will leave the king snake alone. So that's Batesian mimicry. We can have aggressive mimicry, which is basically the opposite. So predators, like this alligator snapping turtle, its tongue looks just like a worm. So this turtle will sit on the bottom of the lake, open its mouth, not move, and just move its tongue to resemble a worm. Well, this will lure a fish in. When a fish takes the bait, alligator's mouth snaps shut, and it has a meal. This is really cool. This snake, this viper, this is the spider-tailed horned viper. It's found in the Middle East, and this is a snake here, and its tail resembles a spider. So what it'll do is it'll blend right into the rocks and just have its tail up, and it'll move its tail in just a way so it resembles a spider. Well, birds like spiders, tasty meal for birds. So a bird will come in, will fly in, see the spider, and it'll go to attack it. Well, when it attacks, this it realizes that, oh wait, this isn't a spider. It's too late. The snake actually will already go ahead and latch onto the bird and then eat the bird. So that's aggressive mimicry. How predators have adaptations to lure prey in. That's mimicry. Camouflage is a real common adaptation, structural adaptation that allows the species to blend in with its surroundings. This is another snake right here. Here's a snake blended perfectly in. This is a fish. This is I think this is a lionfish. Here's the fish. I think this is the fish here. It's camouflaged so well that you can't see it. And then this is like a lizard that's perfect for the environment that it's in. And that's the thing with natural selection that a lot of people don't think about is you're pushing to be best suited for your environment, right? Polar bears have that beautiful white thick fur that's perfect for living in the Arctic Circle where, it gets below 0 degrees in temperature. You're very cold, very harsh conditions up there. But the polar bear has evolved to be best suited for that environment. Now, if you take a polar bear and stick it in the jungle, it's not gonna fare so well. Same is true for tigers. That orange black striped coloration is perfect for the rainforest and the jungles that it lives in. But if you take that out and you put it in a forest around here, it's not gonna do well because it's not suited for that environment. So that's the thing with natural selection. We're pushing or selecting for that environment. Then you have physiological adaptations, which we see a lot in bacteria. So bacteria will actually have adaptations to fight antibiotics or pesticides or whatever. And basically how it works is that, so if here's our original population of bacteria, right? And we hit this with like penicillin, which is a common antibiotic. All right. Well, just through natural variation, you're going to have some bacteria that are more resistant to the penicillin than others. Well, due to this, the penicillin is going to kill off all the bacteria with low level resistance and only leave the high level resistant bacteria left. Well, then the high level bacteria are just going to reproduce and they're going to pass on their resistance. And then finally, you're going to end up with a population that is really resistant to penicillin. We're seeing this with the COVID, right? We have the South African variant, we have the UK variant. Their changes, their adaptations to the environment that this virus is in. It's having adaptations to be best suited for its ever-changing environment. Hospitals have a real problem with this type of thing. MRSA is a real nasty bacteria. What MRSA is this methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, which is like a bacteria. But what it is it's Staphylococcus bacteria that is resistant to methicillin, which is a real common cleaner. It's real commonly used in antibiotics. What this is if you get infected with MRSA, it's difficult to treat because MRSA is resistant to most penicillin type drugs. So anything that ends in this cillin, methicillin, penicillin, it will not work against MRSA. Well, there goes 60-70% of what we have available as far as antibiotics are concerned. So, and what's funny is that MRSA is common in places that do a lot of cleaning, hospitals, schools, nursing homes, because since you're cleaning so much and so often, you're forcing this bacteria, if it wants to stay living, to really only select for the ones that can survive all this cleaning. So over time, the more and more and more you clean surfaces, and if you don't do it well, you're gonna end up with a population of bacteria that's super resistant to cleaners. So so variation, so we talked about all this variation that we see, and it's important because the environments change. It would be great if environments never changed, but that's not the case. The earth has constantly changed over time, and with the earth constantly changing, environments are going to constantly change. Well, for a species to keep living, that means the species has to keep changing with the environment. So, in the way to insert that is variation. The more variation that we have within a species, the more likely that the species will survive as a whole. Now, the individual, the organism may not survive, but the species will. So, and that was the thing, right? Just the more variation we have, the more likely at least some of the species will survive if there was some, climate disaster or natural disaster, just something that caused a massive wipeout of a certain species. Dinosaurs got replaced with mammals because dinosaurs, couldn't keep up with the ever-changing environment that was early Earth. Mammals can, or mammals replace dinosaurs because mammals were able to adapt better to the environment, to the new environment, than what dinosaurs could. So we're going to stop there. So if you have any questions, let me know. Other than that, check out part 2 for the rest of natural selection, and I will see you next time in class.